Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my channel for another Hot Toys comparison video. So today it has to be pretty obvious we're looking at the War Machine. So I recently picked up the War Machine Mark 1 diecast, and obviously I have the other two versions, so why not do one big comparison video? These three figures are just absolutely awesome, each in their own special way, but I still think that the War Machine Mark 1 is my favorite. But still, not spoiling the comparisons or anything like that. We will get more in depth into the differences between all of the armors. So, without further ado, let's compare the Mark 1 to the Mark 2. Now, first things first, you can already notice that there is a size difference between the Mark 1 and the Mark 2. That was already evident in the review video, but what wasn't evident is the true sort of color difference between the Mark 2 and the Mark 1. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline between when these two were released. I'm pretty sure this guy actually came after this figure here, so that's very, very interesting. Now, the helmeted sort of, or I should say unhelmeted face sculpt of Don Cheadle, as you can see, is identical. Even the paintwork looks exactly the same. In fact, there's a little cat hair on that one there. They look exactly the same, which is very interesting. Now, just comparing the two faceplates quickly, I'll focus the camera up for you. Just like so. Comparing the two faceplates, you can see that the Mark II has way more sort of panel line detail compared to the Mark I, but they are both sort of battle damaged and scuffed up, and the detail on the inside is also just a little bit different between the two, which is very nice to see. Now, the Mark 1 does have a really unique sort of head sculpt, being that it does have this really thick sort of lower jaw, which I do really like. It really gives him sort of like an animalistic, really aggressive sort of look, and it's very, very interesting compared to this guy here. Now, he's obviously a lot bulkier, this one's a lot sleeker, and the figure himself is much, much lighter than this Mark 1. I'm just going to swivel them around and show you the side profile. The side profile of the Mark 1 is, in one word, enormous. You can see how wide it is compared to the Mark 2, as well as the fact that it has this sort of Gatling gun chain, whereas this guy has the laser cannon, which is, you know, just a little bit more updated and just more modern than this guy. Now, he also does have, or the Mark 1 also does have these huge sort of guns on his arms, whereas the Mark 2 just doesn't, which is a bit of a shame because I did like those sort of guns on his arms look. Now, the back of the Mark II is also a lot cleaner than the back of the Mark I. You can see there's no sort of rail system like the Mark II has. It's got all these thrusters and extra pieces, obviously because this is a cannibalized version of the Iron Man Mark II armor that Justin Hammer sort of redesigned and upgraded to be this War Machine. So obviously that's why it's looking a lot more sort of Frankenstein and bulky compared to this Mark II. Overall, the legs are also much, much sleeker than on the Mark I. There's no sort of thruster detail pieces like on the Mark I. It's all just one smooth sort of panel. So definitely the name of the game with the Mark II was, hey guys, let's just slim it down, make it more Iron Man-esque. That way, it probably is a little bit easier for them to animate, and also just looking a little bit more sleeker and in line with, obviously, the Iron Man Mark 45 armor that came out in Age of Ultron. Otherwise, this guy would have looked like a relic compared to that super futuristic suit of armor. Comparing the Mark I to the Mark III, you can see that there is definitely a difference in the aesthetic between the two. However, this guy is more of a hybrid between the Mark I and II than anything else we've seen. Obviously, the Mark IV has some camo patterns and stuff like that, and it's way, way more armored up than even this guy. So I do think this is the best hybrid between the two looks. So if you're looking for a great sort of synergy between Mark I and Mark II, this one definitely is the one to go for. It's got that really aggressive sort of head sculpt, and I will compare the likeness as well, because surprise, surprise, it's once again the exact same. I'll show you the faceplates because I did that with the Mark II, so you might want to sort of compare the two. Now, it does have the panel lines, however, they are sort of less pronounced than on the Mark II, and there's also detail on the inside, although not painted as well as the Mark I, and also not much sort of weathering on the faceplate itself. There is weathering, obviously, throughout the rest of the armor. There's silver sort of chips and stuff here and there, so it's not completely clean. However, the faceplate itself is just a little bit cleaner than that of the Mark I. Now, obviously, you can see that it is very bulky. It is, I would say, heavier than this guy. I don't have any scales to hand, but I still think it's heavier than the Mark I, which is very interesting because this guy is, you know, the bulkier, sort of heavier looking dude. So I am very impressed with how they've done that. Now, obviously, as I said, it is a sort of hybrid between the two. It's got the arm cannons like this guy. He had the machine guns down here on the back of his arms, and he's gone back to a sort of gun approach on the shoulder rather than a laser looking plasma sort of thing. The side profile is a little bit more sleek compared to the Mark 1. However, he's not really that much slimmer, is he? I mean, the back, it looks like he's got some sort of hunchback thing going on. All the weight is up here. It's not distributed really evenly. It sort of tapers in here, whereas this guy's sort of more uniform, and he looks sort of more cohesive. Now, obviously, the cannon can be moved up. Mine is very, very loose, unfortunately, but you can see that it's much smaller than the Mark 1, but it still is a gun compared to that laser sort of piece that we got on the Mark 2. Now, the backs are very different on these guys. He's gone back to having thrusters, though, on the backside here, which is very interesting. I do like the thrusters. It just provides him more of an aggressive sort of look when you do have the thrusters on the back. So I'm very happy that they've gone back and added those into the Civil War design. It looks really awesome. And obviously, the paintwork, this guy has more sort of little chipping throughout, whereas this guy has more of the chipping and wear on the silver sort of parts and less so on the grey, whereas this guy is sort of the opposite. None on the silver, more on the grey. So they've definitely sort of inverted the way they do the colouring on this Mark III. Now, the legs are actually very, very similar in shape and design. Now, obviously, they are just a little bit sleeker on the Mark III because it is still a newer design. They couldn't sort of just rehash it entirely. And he still does have those thrusters on the back, which, you know, I do love. I love when they have these extra sort of thruster pieces. I really do. Really like that, so I'm happy that they've included that. Now, this guy is incredibly heavy, so he's quite hard to keep standing. In fact, swiveling these guys around is an act in patience and balancing in and of itself. But either way, you can see the legs are just a little bit more bulky on the Mark 1, more streamlined on the Mark III. I thought I'd quickly bring out the Mark 6 because, like anything Marvel, what is it without a good cameo? So he is a really, really awesome piece. I still love that Mark 6. But anyway, this is not about him. The Mark 1 War Machine, as you can see, is definitely just a little bit sort of taller and bulkier and just looks like a completely different sort of beast compared to the Mark 6. And obviously that's sort of how it worked on screen as well. This guy was the sort of really aggressive, destructive sort of war machine, because obviously that's what he is. And they do look really awesome together. They complement each other very, very nicely. Now, I don't know if there's any real point in sort of comparing their side profile, but you can see the War Machine Mark 1 is way bulkier than the Mark 6 diecast. Now, this comparison video has unfortunately come to an end. That is all the War Machines that I have to compare this guy to. He is just awesome, and I'm so happy that I picked him up. This obviously wasn't the review. I wasn't going to, at the end, tell you whether or not to pick this guy up. I already told you in the review, this guy is a must-buy if you can find him to go along with your Mark 6 diecast, because they look so good together. They complement each other so nicely, and I'm very impressed with how this is going to look on the shelf. I'm obviously going to pose them up just a little bit more than this, but this is looking already pretty darn awesome. So definitely do check out the review if you haven't already. Like me on, follow me on Instagram, and also like and join even if you want. OSA16 Australia, check them out. Everything is down in the description below. But enough of that. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.